Good afternoon, Mr. Papier. Just switch on the mic there.
Good afternoon, Chief Justice.
Are you a bit nervous or just as comfortable as you are when at home?
Not as at home, but I am comfortable. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you. Now, tell us about your legal experience. You've been an attorney for a long time, isn't it?
That's right, Chief Justice, for about 30 years.
30.
That's right.
Wow. And the diversity of work you did as an attorney?
Yes, Chief Justice, for the first 17 years, I practiced in a township called Mitchell's Plain in the Western Cape. And for 17 years, I did probably exclusively human rights-related work and litigation. After 17 years, I transitioned to a corporate and commercial firm called ENS Africa, where I specialized in commercial work in the commercial department, practiced commercial law, and spent 2 years in the US doing postgraduate studies. I was also privileged to spend...
That was in Harvard, isn't it?
That was at Harvard, that's right, Chief Justice.
Yes. And your second master's degree
was at
the
UCT.
University of Cape Town is on commercial law.
That's right, Chief Justice.
What did you use your mediation? Is it a diploma certificate?
It's a
your mediation
diploma.
certificate for?
Yes. I've been privileged to be invited to mediate in a number of commercial matters, but also in the context of community work. And I think that one of the encouraging experiences in a large corporate and commercial law firm was when I was appointed, for example, to administer the Richtersveld community, I was appointed as the administrator of the Communal Property Association in the Richtersveld. And of course, it was a fragmented community. And it was the success of the project depended on the way in which I was able to, in fact, engage with the communities and the different parties and players. And that was a huge success. Similarly, I was privileged to serve the profession on the Council of the Law Society of the Cape, and council, pursuant to my departure as a councillor or as a president, I was called upon to, in fact, mediate issues on council from time to time. There's also been, I was privileged to be appointed as the administrator of the Estate Agents Affairs Board, for example. There were internal and external dynamics, and in those contexts, mediation skills come to the fore. And then, of course, there's been mainstream commercial disputes where I was invited to mediate as well. And yes.
I have an insatiable appetite for mediation, but time does not permit that I go all the way. Just very briefly, tell me how mediation could be beneficially introduced into the court system, the entire court system. Very briefly.
Yes. Chief Justice, I think that there are some scenarios that would not be appropriate for mediation.
Like rape cases, murder cases.
Absolutely. Plea bargaining might have some elements of mediation, and some elements of mediation can come to the fore when in the sort of trial management context. To encourage the state and the defense to engage with each other. So there are elements of mediation. I think in matters like family law matters or in other commercial disputes as well, might very well be ripe for mediation, and it arises in the context of counsel. I'm often intrigued by huge teams of counsel coming in to introduce themselves to me as an acting judge and to ask the simple question, have you been talking to each other? Seemed to produce some interesting results. They would return and thank you for encouraging them to reflect and resolve issues. And I think that the skill of mediation would make one alive and sensitive to circumstances where mediation would be appropriate and encourage the parties to go and do that. Of course, that would be within the formal structure of the judicial service. I think outside of that structure, where the profession is perhaps engaging with its members and there are disputes coming to the fore.
And community advice centers, community justice institutions.
Yes, indeed. And I think that in those matters that are ripe for mediation and identified as such, Chief Justice,
yes,
it would be most appropriate and I think and enjoyable to see parties resolving their disputes in a way that is less confrontational.
If you were to be appointed a judge, can we count on your availability to assist in training programs relating to mediation and the actual implementation of mediation in the court system?
Yes, it will be an absolute pleasure to do that. It's something I enjoy, Chief Justice, and I think it's part of making justice accessible to all who need it. So it would be an honor and a privilege to, in fact, contribute in whatever way I can.
What is the longest period you have taken before you could deliver a reserve judgment?
3 months and 1 week, Chief Justice.
That is the longest?
That's right.
Very well. JP?
Thank you, Chief Justice. Good afternoon, Mr. Papier.
Good afternoon, JP.
You are Papier, not Papier.
There are 7 pronunciations. I respond to all of them, Chief Justice.
You don't object to Papier or Papier?
Not at all.
All right, thank you. I just didn't want to offend.
Not at all, Chief Justice.
Okay.
That's impossibility of performance.
Thank you, Chief Justice. It is customary at this commission to disclose that I have known you since 1996, I think we met when you returned from Harvard.
That's correct,
And we've had over the years a very cordial relationship that I want to disclose up front. In fact, we had a number of projects together, even when you were president of the Law Society, yes. Also when you were chairman of the Sheriff's Board. So over the years, we've known each other.
Yes.
May I also confirm for the record that you have acted in the division over the periods indicated in your CV. Right.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Papier. The first relates to racism.
Yes.
It's common cause, I put it to you, that there is racism on the bench, there is racism in the profession, and there is racism everywhere in South Africa.
Yes.
Were you to be supported for appointment by this committee, kindly share with us what steps you would take to assist in the eradication of racism, either individually or collectively, as it rears its ugly head.
Yes. Thank you, Judge President. I think there are different categories of racism, if you will. There's the overt racism, and wherever overt racism rears its ugly head, it needs to be dealt with unambiguously, in no uncertain terms. I think that I'm more concerned about stereotypical and stigmatic practices that has a desperate impact on impacting negatively on people of color. And I think that, Judge President, sometimes those practices manifest itself by perpetrators either consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally. And I think that it's incumbent on all of us to engage constructively to try and eradicate the evil of racism wherever we find it and in whatever form it manifests itself.
The issue, Mr. Papier, of skewed briefing patterns,
Yes.
whereby black people and African women in particular are on the receiving end, is it not a form of institutionalized racism, if you like?
There is no question about that, Judge President, and particularly I think that is one of the examples where stereotypical and stigmatic racism manifests itself. And once again, now that we know that, what are we going to do about it and how do we engage with the problem? And I think that's the challenge to all of us, to engage constructively with those problems that we experience and that we know about. Yes.
Right. The Chief Justice alluded earlier to court-based mediation. I'm not going to repeat that. But would you agree with me that there are other mechanisms in addition to court-based mediation, such as pre-trials, continuous role, and so on,
Yes.
which I call effective tools of case flow management?
Yes. There's no doubt about the effectiveness of the effective tools of case flow management, Judge President. And I think that every initiative has its place. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I think it invites all of us to be innovative and creative with regard to mediation, case flow management, and the tools that are working exceptionally and exceedingly well.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Papier. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Judge President. Ms. Stewart?
Thank you, Chief Justice. I must disclose I also know Mr. Papier. I've worked with him in the past. I only have a short question. In your application form, you mentioned at paragraph 6.2.3 that you have been specializing in corporate and commercial law since 2004, and I have therefore not been directly involved in litigation.
Yes.
Are you confident that you've had enough litigation experience on the bench to deal with whatever would be thrown at you as a High Court judge now?
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner. 17 years of my pre-commercial life was spent in the courts litigating, and that was not briefing counsel, it was actually doing the litigation myself, being back in the criminal courts, I've been privileged to be presiding in some criminal trials. I think it's a happy homecoming.
Thanks, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Professor Muteka?
Papier, I came out of Harvard Law School with the reluctance of recommending anybody to go there because I thought people come out of there with elitism and not interested in community justice. How did you manage to be community orientated and even practice that and go to the ground?
I can only step on the ankles of icons. The people I've been privileged to work with over the years, those great leaders that informed my political conscience, the clients I've been privileged to serve, the institutions I've been privileged to serve, and of course, Harvard is a diverse institution. It has a human rights program and a human rights faculty attracting human rights leaders from all over the world. I was privileged to form part of a group of postgraduate students, 150 postgraduate students from 50 countries across the world. Many of those students have in fact committed their lives to the cause of human rights and social and economic rights and the like. Of course, on the other hand, there are, and I think, Mr. Commissioner, that it's the way one observes the management of power the management of credentials, the management of perceived status, if you will. It could either drive humility or it could drive pomposity and arrogance. I've chosen to, in fact, ensure that leadership in humility is probably one of the most important attributes we
That's
should embrace.
commendable. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Mpofu?
Thank you very much, CJ.
Yes.
Mr. Papier, you've basically grown up in the Western Cape. correct?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Yes. Now, and if you don't mind me saying, I mean, everything here points to you being a progressive lawyer. Would that be fair? Modesty aside.
I have been called that before.
Yes. Okay. Good. All right. Now, I want to talk to you about. No, that's not a question. I'm being intimidated. Mr. Papier. It looks like you have mobilized someone. The question I really want to ask you is one which is about language.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that it is incumbent, more particularly on progressive lawyers like yourself, to encourage people to learn other African languages? And having grown up in the Western Cape, have you taken any steps to learn isiXhosa? Or if not, would you agree that one of the ways in which this could be encouraged going forward would be to make it as a compulsory subject to use, rather for students to learn one of the indigenous languages? Yes.
There is no question about that, Commissioner, and absolutely no doubt in my mind that the need to encourage everyone to not only embrace but to speak an African or an indigenous language, particularly isiXhosa, is absolutely critical. So ndithetha ncinci isiXhosa, and but I have done, I have tried, and I have been attending numerous lessons and on an ongoing basis, and that will not stop. It will continue, and I think that it's most certainly an exciting initiative that we must encourage.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, Commissioner Mpofu. Commissioner Fourie?
I must also disclose that I've known you for many, many years, Mr. Papier. I just want to ask you one question. Amongst many other things, you were, albeit a long time ago, chair of the National Board for Sheriffs.
Yes.
And you indicate in your questionnaire that you contributed to the drafting of the National Action Plan for Transformation of the sheriff's profession. There are serious challenges as we speak with the sheriffs, serious service delivery problems. One of the reasons may be that many sheriffs battle to financially survive.
Yes.
Have you got any ideas, briefly, as to how that very serious problem can be addressed and hopefully resolved?
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner. My life with the Sheriff's Board probably goes back to about 18 years, where we worked long and hard to put in place a national action plan to transform the sheriff's profession. The work was done. The plan was put in. The plan was presented, but adopted 18 years later. I think with regard to the question you raised, Commissioner, you would find geographically a number of areas that are exceptionally lucrative, but a significant part of the geographical areas are economically non-viable. And so during my time 18 years ago, I encouraged the board and the department to promulgate regulations appointing more than one sheriff, multiple sheriffs to one area of jurisdiction. And the purpose of that was to ensure that more historically disadvantaged sheriffs would be able to be appointed to lucrative areas of jurisdiction. And so I think that is one way in which an analysis could be done to identify those areas that would be able to accommodate more multiple sheriffs. Of course, the areas that are not economically viable would probably remain economically non-viable because the work of the sheriff is dependent on the flow of process from the courts. Other than reviewing the model of the sheriff's profession innovatively, where one says, well, is it perhaps time to consider whether one should move away from these distinct jurisdictions and have one profession and get sheriffs to respond to process in a way that they are not restricted to their jurisdictions. But I think that is a debate that would have to be had. I think the big problem, and the crisp response to your question, Commissioner, is the super lucrative areas and the economically non-viable areas. And that is the big challenge.
But surely those economically non-viable areas do need sheriff services.
They do, absolutely.
And hasn't the time perhaps come that sheriffs should, and I don't want to burden the state, but I'm just putting that as a solution, that sheriffs be appointed and remunerated by the state, as opposed to trying to run their own businesses, so to speak.
Yes. Perhaps in economically non-viable areas that would work, but in economically viable areas, it's very, very lucrative business.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Commissioner Fourie. Commissioner Schmidt.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Mr. Papier, with due respect, otherwise impressive CV, I found one problem with on a lighter note, but it deals with the issue in paragraph 8 of your nomination form.
Yes.
And it basically says that and it says African National Congress, Branch EXCA and Legal Advisory Committee 1990 to 93.
Yes.
Was that the Legal Advisory Committee on branch level or which level?
On branch level, yes, or provincial level.
Provincial level.
Yes.
And then you say ad hoc assistance, and there's another time period there, 1995 to 2017.
Yes.
Currently still?
Well, as a lawyer, I assist if, as, and when required with legal issues. On election day, I would assist to mediate in the townships. That role, as a lawyer, is on a needs basis, as and when required. And of course, as and when available.
And can I be as frank as that to ask whether it involved any political electioneering or physical canvassing?
No. This is strictly legal advice, compliance with the electoral laws, compliance, legal compliance issues, no campaigning.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Commissioner Fourie. President Meyer.
Thank you, Chief Justice. It is not often in this country that black lawyers get an opportunity to practice meaningfully in the area of corporate and commercial law, even when they do have the necessary academic qualifications. What did you do differently, and what can we do to break down the barriers so that in the foreseeable future we have a wide pool of black legal experts in mergers and acquisitions and all these fancy, areas of specialty.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner. Very well. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I think that it is so that black practitioners must be consistently encouraged to be exposed and evolve as experts in specialist areas of commercial law. I think it's incumbent on the partners, the leadership, the firms, as our firm had a transformation program where the partners and directors would in fact ensure that historically disadvantaged practitioners, students, are in fact appointed. I was privileged to lead a team of up to 8 lawyers and candidates, and at one stage my team was entirely black. I have also participated in and sat on the Cyrus Vance panel, which is a program run by the New York Bar Association. And there we would in fact identify about 8 black practitioners with 1 or 2 years of commercial law experience or wanting to get into commercial law. And there we would in fact locate those students and lawyers with New York Wall Street law firms and of course banks like the Morgan Stanleys and others for a year to be exposed to top-end corporate and commercial and banking and finance transactions. And these initiatives are all in place. With regard to the question of what I did in particular, I was privileged to serve and to represent some parastatals where we constituted a panel of 5 micro-enterprise, black-owned and controlled law firms, particularly women, and put in place a joint venture agreement where those law firms in fact participated together with the teams of experts to get exposure and opportunity into the world of corporate and commercial law, because I believe that exposure and opportunity equals expertise. And so we need to, in fact, create those opportunities for black practitioners to be exposed in environments that's conducive to inspire them, first of all, to remain, and then, of course, encourage them to, and all of us to prosper.
Those are brilliant initiatives, but my concern is that it does not seem that they are practiced uniformly by all the relevant law firms in this country.
Yes.
What can we do to make sure that the gates are opened to our people, our lawyers?
Yes. Commissioner, I think first of all, we must never give up hope. And we must always keep on encouraging in whatever form and in whatever opportunity we have, encourage the leadership of those firms, the attorneys, the profession, to enhance their transformation programs. Of course, we can't also do that in a clinical way, because it's about the hearts and minds of people who actually understand that you need to create an environment in which you are able to, conducive to learning, conducive to motivating, conducive to inspiring and unlocking the potential in candidates. And so the encouragement is one. I think it's also important to understand that it works both ways, I think. The private sector and the public sector need to, in fact, be encouraged to be very firm with regard to their requirements to see black lawyers forming part of their teams. Now, there are a number of these initiatives in place, but whether to give meaning, form, and content to those initiatives, I think that is where we often encounter some of the stumbling blocks. So I try and encourage wherever I am able to do so, talk to whoever is willing to listen, and constructively engage with regard to creating opportunities for candidates interested in acquiring the skills and evolving into to experts in the corporate and commercial world.
Sure. Commissioner Nyambi, I noticed that I haven't cancelled you out, although I've called people who come after you. Did I ever call you? I apologize to you. It's your turn now, sir.
If you can share with us your best and worst experience in the legal fraternity, briefly, if any.
Yes, I think there's been a couple of bests. Succeeding in representing your clients who have been victimized and brutalized back in, prior to 1994 by the system, being charged with criminal offenses or charged with political offenses, and in fact securing the acquittal. That is an obvious highlight. Being able to contribute, I think one of the best moments for me was when the Cape Law Society adopted an obligatory pro bono rule. And then, of course, I was privileged to serve on the Law Society of South Africa's pro bono committee as well. And when all the provinces, in fact, ultimately adopted an obligatory pro bono rule, that was a highlight for access to justice. And so there's been a number of those. Worst,
I think you can mention one or two.
yes, very well. Not being able to achieve the objectives that one ultimately wanted to achieve. Seeing a client suffering at the hands, of an unjust system.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, Commissioner Nyambi. Commissioner Malema?
The former Deputy Chief Justice, Musanek, are you aware that he was in Robben Island?
Yes.
Why was he there? Why was he in Robben Island?
He was convicted of for terrorism.
For his political activities, right?
Yes.
And he belonged to a political party.
Yes.
And he was a good Deputy Chief Justice.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Mr. Papier, you are excused. You are excused, sir. Oh, no, I had not noticed him. Commissioner Masuku, I apologize to you, Mr. Papier. Commissioner Masuku has a question.
Thank you, Chief Justice. It's a very short question. Mr. Papier, would you consider the Law Society to be a progressive organization, the Law Society of Cape Town? We asked the previous candidate the same question, so I just think it's fair to ask you that same question as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Law Society of the Western Cape is a diverse organization. It's a diverse body. The constituent members of the Cape Law Society consist of BLA, NADAL, and the so-called statutory component. I think that it is diverse in the true sense of the word. We would find conservative views, you would find progressive views, and I think that the element that during my time that galvanized the Cape Law Society was the element of good faith, where you have participants, regardless of their diverse views, committed to want to make a difference. And sometimes there are highs when you are able to move what we would perceive, or what some would perceive to be a progressive objective forward. The pro bono adoption was a progressive moment.
Thank
yes.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Masuku. You're excused, sir.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
you so much.